Hi everyone, it's Richard Jones here from Fearless Speakers, and in this video I'm going to be talking you through steps 1 to 2 of my signature talk clock process. This is the process or methodology that I use to help my clients to develop their own signature talks and TED Talks. So let's get straight into it and start off with step 1. So if you've watched the first video, you'll hopefully remember that I said that generally speaking, or ideally, a signature talk has one key message running all the way through it. And so step 1 is find your key message. There are a number of benefits to having one key message running through your talk, as opposed to lots of separate pieces of information, of content that aren't really related to each other. One of the key benefits is that it makes it much easier for you as a speaker, as a presenter, to compile your talk. If you think about it, finding one message and then using lots of different ways to illustrate that message is a lot easier than coming up with, let's say, 10 separate pieces of content. It's also a lot easier to remember. So remember that you're going to have to deliver this talk live, ideally without any notes. So the easiest way that you can associate what goes next in your mind at each stage of the talk, the better. And this methodology, having one key message, really helps you to reinforce that. It really helps the audience as well. Now, I've been a public speaker now for over 20 years, and I've also sat through hundreds, if not thousands of talks. And it's quite common for people to say at some stage during their talk, if you only remember one thing from this talk, it's this, right? Now, that's quite a cliched phrase, right? But it's actually true. People do generally only remember one thing. So if you want them to remember it, it's best to really reinforce it. Have it running all the way through the talk, and that's your best possible way that people will remember it and will respond to it and react to it. Another great benefit is that it can be related very closely to your call to action, which we'll talk about in a later video. But that is your first step. Now, how do you find your key message? Well, if your talk is going to be related to what's happened to you in your life and what you've learned from that, then a great question that I ask my clients is, what is the biggest learning that you've had in your life? What's the biggest takeaway? That's a great question for you to reflect on, and that you can, by asking yourself that question, you can come up with some great ideas about what your message might be. One of the ways that you can do that is you can think back over your life and look at some of the high points, the low points, the challenges, the turning points, and think, what did I learn at each stage? And again, that might help you to really generate those ideas. So have a go at that and just see what you come up with. Incidentally, those of you who watched the first video will know that I suggested that you watch the TED Talk by Rita Pierson. So I'm curious, what do you think the key message was in that talk? Little hint, it's the title. Not every title has to be the key message. In this case, it is. But even if you hadn't known that title, Every Kid Needs a Champion, I'm pretty sure you would have got that was the key message for that talk. Okay, so that's our step 1 then. Find your key message. However, it's my personal philosophy that words are not enough. And this is the mistake that I find a lot of public speakers and a lot of TED talkers, signature talkers make, is that they focus on what they want to say, but they don't focus on how they want their audience to feel. And that is the second step. Decide on your intended impact. And by impact, I mean emotional impact. How do you want your audience to go away feeling as a result of hearing your message? Now, it's important to think about what your impact is going to be and how that relates to your key message. So think about, in one word, based on that key message, what would your audience, what would you want them to feel? But it may be that during the course of your talk, you want to create some kind of emotional arc. Let's take the example of a hero's journey. That's quite a typical story format that I use with my clients and help them to craft their stories and their talks. So what typically happens in a hero's journey is you have a protagonist, which is usually the person's normally talking about themselves, but they could be talking about a third party. But there's a protagonist in this story. Everything's fine in their world until suddenly something happens that causes them to fall into a low point. And as a result of that low point, they have to search deep in themselves to get out of it. So it could be some kind of challenge, it could be something, some kind of learning or something that they overcome. So essentially, once they've gone through that process, then they find that there's an upturn. And as a result of that, they suddenly have some kind of change, realization, and suddenly their life is different or better as a result. So as you can see, during that process, you could take your audience on a bit of an emotional roller coaster, couldn't you? You could start off with this kind of feeling of intrigue, what's going to happen? And then during the low point, you could get them to really feel that emotion of despair or sorrow or anger that the protagonist is feeling. And then as they come out the other side, it could be of joy, elation, excitement, anticipation, whatever it could be. So really think about that. Think about your talk as an emotional journey for your audience. So those are steps 1 to 2. What we're going to do in the next video is we're going to take you further through the clock, and we're going to look at some of the nuts and bolts, some of the content you might use to really bring your key message to life.